All right, I see some people are starting to roll into our webinar now, so we'll give everyone another minute to join as the numbers are still creeping up, and then we will start ourselves off with a little presentation from myself from CGCN. We'll just give another minute. Okay, so we're going to get things started now. So first of all, thank you everyone for joining today for Canadian Grapevine Certification Networks, or CGCN's third webinar of 2023. This is going to be our last webinar in our three-part series that focuses on viticulture and climate change. So today the focus is on disease-resistant varieties. Please note that we will be recording this webinar. It will be posted to our website if you wish to view this afterwards or to share it with your colleagues. So my name is Darian Temporal. I'm the new Executive Director of the Canadian Grapevine Certification Network, and I will serve as your moderator for today's webinar. We are joined by a panel of fantastic guest speakers. We have Darcy O'Neill and Alexander Morandell, excuse me, from PIWI International. We have Helen Fisher from the University of Guelph and a member of the Technical Committee of Ontario Grape and Wine Research Incorporated, or I'll be referring to that as OGWRI. And we also have Andréanne Hébert-Haché from CRAM. She's also one of our researchers who will be starting research on the agri-science cluster side. We're also joined by Ross Wise, who's one of our members of the board of directors and the chair of the Knowledge and Technology Transfer Committee. We have Hans Buchler, who is the chair of CGCN, and then we have Ethan Churchill, who is CGCN's project manager. And unfortunately, I know everyone was looking forward to Mr. Donald Zeraldo joining us today. Unfortunately, he is unable to attend. His flight back from Dubai was delayed, so he is in the air as we speak. I'm sure we're all well aware of the flight delays and cancellations that have become common today. So we do apologize. We know many people were looking forward to his talk. However, we are extremely grateful to Helen Fisher for stepping in so last minute. I have the pleasure of working with Helen personally as in my other role as project manager of OGWRI, and her expertise and knowledge that she brings to all organizations is invaluable. So first, I'll explain our schedule for today. I'll be starting us off by giving some timely updates of CGCN. Alexander and Darcy will talk about PIWI International, talk about their organization and maybe some of the varieties that they're looking to bring to Canada. Andréanne will focus on research and project objectives of her upcoming cluster activity. And then Helen Fisher will speak to other disease-resistant varieties and relating these to cold hardiness here in Canada. We will also hold a Q&A session at the end of all these presentations, so please feel free to add questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into my section of the presentation here. So the CGCN has two clean plant protocols that running in parallel for the time being. I'm sure if you've been in these webinars before, you've probably heard of all these programs. So first we have our certification program, option 1. It's the most rigorous protocol, centers around propagation of CGCN's G1 repository, which is tested and held at the CFIA Center in BC. And this is with the help of nurseries through G1A, G2, G3, and G4 levels for grapevine material that is tested and certified from a whole host of viruses before being sold to the grape grower at the G4 level. And these plants are eligible to be labeled as certified plus. We have the option 2. This was initiated in early 2021. This allows nurseries to propagate material from pre-existing vineyard blocks at the G3 level that have undergone thorough testing using high throughput sequencing technology. These vines are able to be labeled certified. It isn't as quite as rigorous as the option 1 protocols. However, this allows nurseries to provide certified grapevines to buyers in a timely manner without compromising on virus testing. And next we have our interim program, which was put in place to provide a temporary option for virus tested grapevines until certified stock is able to come to commercial production. So this program works with nurseries to test existing propagation blocks of leaf roll 1 and 3, red blotch and Pinot Gris virus. We also work with grape growers and wineries for custom propagation services. And then due to new research findings, though, the 4 viruses of concern will be under review by the CGCN certification committee and may change in the near future. So we are going to be applying to the next agri-assurance programming under the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership. So our last cost sharing initiative under this program under CAP ended on March 31st, 2023 of this year. However, we are hoping to continue this cost sharing initiative by applying to this program again. This would reduce virus testing for the nursery grower or winery by about 50%. So if you work in a nursery, if you know a nursery that wants to start selling clean vines at half the cost of testing, please contact me. We are working with both nurseries for general propagation as well as growers and wineries, as I mentioned, who wish to do custom propagation of their own vineyards for this program. You can find my contact information at the bottom of this slide. Other timely information here, as the CAP cluster has just ended, we will be getting some year 5 and final reports in. So fitting to this webinar on climate change, the cold hardiness and climate change page of our website under the research heading is a great place to find up-to-date research results from the cluster. It includes bud hardiness data from multiple provinces in the winter, as well as growing degree updates throughout the season. So you can check back to the website regularly to be informed of these new research updates and information. And we also have a new-ish resource on the CGCN website. So this is our grapevine variety and clone information database. This is where we want anyone in the industry to be able to share their experiences of different varieties, clones, and rootstocks that'll help others make planting decisions. So it's open for everybody to contribute. There's many categories that you can add your input to. All we ask is that you make sure you are putting your region as that it is regionally specific to ensure feedback is relevant. So this is a kind of a snapshot of what that survey looks like. Anything that has a red asterisk is what is required for the survey. However, you don't need to use your name. You don't need to use your company. We just want to be able to open a platform to all growers so that there is something that maybe if someone's planting a new vineyard or new to Canada, they can come to this resource here and get some information to make their best decision possible for their region. So you can find that at cgcn-rccv.ca/variety and clone database. And so with that, I thank you. That is it for the CGCN side of the presentation. You can email or call me at the number here. Same with Ethan's project manager. His information is on the slide here. So I will stop sharing. And I will now introduce our 2 PIWI international representatives. So a little bit about PIWI. PIWI International began as an international working group for the promotion of fungus-resistant grape varieties founded in 1999. PIWI grape varieties are specifically bred to have a high resistance to fungal diseases and enable a significant reduction in the use of pesticides. They mainly come from public, research institutes, breeding institutes or universities, although some private breeders also had success with breeding new varieties. The organization's goal is to aid in the growth of scientific and practical knowledge in the field of fungus-resistant grapevines at the international level. So first, we have Darcy O'Neill. He is a writer, public speaker, chemist, farmer, and grape grower based out of southern Western Ontario. He has over 14 years of experience working in research and development labs, including 7 years in engine oil research and 6 years in molecular pathology at the University of Western Ontario. He has been writing about drinks since 2005 on the blog The Art of Drink, and has been nominated for the Best New Cocktail Book in 2011 at Tales of the Cocktail for his book Fix the Pumps, The History of the American Soda Fountain, which was published in 2010. And more recently, he has focused on growing low environmental impact wine grapes on 11 acres of North Shore of Lake Erie, and he heads the Canadian chapter of PIWI International. We are also joined by Alexander Morandell, who currently serves as the president of the PIWI Board of Directors. In his role, he aims to expand the international presence of PIWI and establish brand recognition with growers and winemakers across Europe and abroad. So without further ado, I welcome both our PIWI representatives to share their presentations.
Good morning. So I'll let Alexander explain the history of the PIWI group, and then I'll add my parts on after that are specific to Canada and Ontario. So, morning, Alexander. Oh, I think
Just gotta unmute yourself.
My microphone was out. Hello.
Hello.
All together. Hi, Darcy. Hi, Doreen. And hello to you. I'm still in Spain, and I hope that my internet will working well. So it's a quick input, and I will share with you just quickly a small presentation about okay. PIWI International was introduced in 1999. So next year we have 25 years of PIWI International organization family and working especially in the middle of the Europe, and now in the last years also in France, Italy, and in the eastern part of Europe. So can you see this small introduction?
Yep.
Yes,
Yeah.
we can see that. Thank you.
No, sorry about the internet is here quite not so like, okay. PIWI International, this is the brand, but was created in 2004 and is now also still used and refreshed with a big work in the last time. PIWI International since 1999. I give you this small presentation and I send it to you by email so you can share it also with other participators. Now we are actually active in France, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Czech, Lombardia, Veneto, for the moment organized on regional, on the national groups. The goal is in the next year to become the final structure of a federation who is working with nations, and the nations are structured in regions, in towns, in movements, and so we can have both finally the roots in the local vineyards, and also the connections and the common goals and works of national and international. Here you can see what happens in Europe in PIWI. This is the circle of members that we have, the biggest in Germany, in Switzerland, and in Austria. And then we have in Italy and in the other European towns and nations. PIWI has now around 1,000 societies, people, and we estimate in the next years to become doubled. Here, it's where people is working in breeding programs around the world, also in America, in the North, in Canada, and also in the US. There are a lot of institutes, they had works in the past, and they are still working today to increase resistance in important varieties and also breeding new varieties. This is the situation of our memberships in Europe. So you can see here in the center of Europe, we have also a lot of members, and the goal is to increase the connections to US, to Canada, but also in France and in other regions and the nations. Why? In the last 2-3 years, the estates planted a lot of PIWI plants. And so we need maybe now to structure the communication, the knowings, and to bring together breeders, growers, and also the officers, the governors who has to work in the law and in the development and also in the rules when people is using resistant with varieties. Here we have a small situation in Italy. Is maybe the youngest nation who is running in the development. For 2023, we have doubled the plantations, and so we expect also a lot of wine for the next years. And you can see, is especially in the north and in the eastern part of Italy. We have 59 estates in Trentino Alto Adige, is the northern region, and 2 in the Abruzzo, where PIWIs was implemented in the last year. So also here we became new regions, we become new members, we become also new activity in breeding. And of course, we have also breeding activity in Italy, in Udine and in San Michele. Okay, here you can see the varieties who are inscribed presently in Europe. We have in Switzerland, we have not the biggest plantations, but Switzerland is the land who you can plant the most varieties. In Germany, we have 75 varieties inscribed. In Italy, only 36, and Austria 13. It's also depending on the local rules and depending on what happens in the local wine community. Open the wine production for new varieties or for new products is every time a long and hard work to do. What are the common goals of PIWI International? Of course, increase the knowings around PIWI, giving a member service, regional, international, of training and information. Also, in collaboration with organizations like yours, exchange, of course, knowings and experience, and working through the agreements and rules in the communication and also in the explication of the PIWI. Here you can see how it's working when we breed the new varieties. We pull out the cape, and so we can extract the stems, and finally we have only feminine part of the grape, and with the seeds we can fertilize and we can create a new variety And finally, the goal is to have big grapes and a good bottle of wine. But still, we are every time talking about grapes. If you are talking about varieties, we don't mean wine, we mean grapes. This is an example of a geological tree from Bronner. Bronner it's one of the most important variety in the North Italy, and you can see how long was the breeding way and how many years they needed to become finally a variety who has resistant genes, but also, and this is essentially quality in grape and in wine, and also a constantly production in the field. Also, this is important for the let me finish with showing you what happens in cultivation of PIWI in Europe. We are still on 0.5% and 3% of the surface in the different regions. We have also regions where we have zero, who or where the varieties are not permitted to planting. And so we suppose that the really planted surface is higher, but official we have 0.5% to 3%. Maybe Germany is the nation with the biggest percentual value of resistant grapes planted. But in Germany, we have maybe 30% of them is Regent, an older variety who is now not considered more to plant, and it will be substituted with other varieties. The vinification distribution is depending, and maybe here Darshan can talking to you also what happens in Canada and in US. And finally, also the denomination, the labeling is strictly dependent on the rules and the local rules. We have a PIWI International Brand Book, what give our members the opportunity to use a straight and also now and image to say and to show we are using resistant varieties, we are PIWIs, and we are still part of PIWI International family. If you need some more information, here are the contacts, and what I said initially, I will send this presentation to the so you can share them on all the participants. Okay, thank you very much for the attention.
Hello, well, I'll go ahead and talk about PIWI Canada, unless anybody has anything to add. But I've been drinking wine for a long time, obviously, like a lot of people. But an article in the Globe and Mail back in 2015 really got me started on this journey. It was that in France, grapes account for 3.7% of the total cropland, but they use 20% of the pesticides. And that seemed wrong. And Beppy, who wrote the article, talked about if you want to reduce your footprint of pesticide use, to pick wines from drier climates. Now, it doesn't really help Ontario or Canada because we are a northern, fairly damp climate, and fungus is obviously an issue. So that got me started. And when I managed to get a piece of land to plant grapes, my goal was to plant grapes that were fungus resistant. It just makes sense to me, having a background in science, that this is the future. And when I was talking to some of the researchers at JKI in Germany, specifically Dr. Kofer, he mentioned that genetically the funguses are going to develop faster, and they're going to get resistant to all the fungicides we produce, and we won't be able to produce fungicides as fast as the fungus can mutate. And this is why we always have to change our fungicides throughout the season. And right now you change them 3-4 times in a season, and you never really want to spray more than 3 times with one fungicide. And that's an issue. And the idea of using natural genetics to fight fungus seems more appropriate to me. It's going to reduce the number of sprays we do. It's going to reduce diesel fuel and consumption labor. We can spend more time working on our wines or improving the growing conditions instead of spraying, because once you spray, sometimes you can't be back in the field for a while. So it solves a lot of problems in a very simple package. Now, in Ontario and in Canada, we do have a few issues. The one for me and most other growers right now is actually the availability of PIWI grapevines. And it's this idea that obviously we want to protect the grapevines we have, so we don't want to bring in new diseases. So the regulations are fairly strict. And it's been difficult to get the new modern German and other research for European grapevines into Canada. Things are getting a little bit better. Upper Canada Growers is now working on the Italian PIWI varieties. We can now import from New York State, which happens to have 5 PIWI varieties: Monarch, Mascaris, Loro from Czechoslovakia, and then Helios and Johann Hinter from Germany. Only Leroy's from Czechoslovakia. But those 5 varieties are enough to get started, plus the Italian varieties, which you can get at Novavine. But again, they all have to be imported from the United States. And one of the problems with that is some of them just don't want to do the paperwork, especially if you just want to order a small amount of the vines for a test plot. So if you wanted to order 250 vines, some of them set a minimum of 1,000 vines. And again, these are the issues that I'm working through with PIWI International. If that's the goal of my part in PIWI Canada, is to try to get this smoother for all grape growers to get through. The other issue is that sometimes we can't get the licenses to propagate the vines in Canada. A lot of the European vine breeders issue a North American license. So for example, Amberg Vineyards or Amberg Grapevines in New York has a whole North American license for Freiberg varieties. And that includes Mascaris and Monarch. And so we won't be able to propagate those until the licensing. So they're protected plants, and some of those we won't be able to propagate or won't be out of license until like 2039. So that would be Mascaris as an example, because it has basically patent protection, plant patent rights. And that becomes a problem for local propagators. So we're always going to have to depend on other people to produce vines for us, and then we'll have to import them. Again, that's something I'm working on, though Upper Canada Growers does have some of the Italian varieties. Now, we have some local problems as well. Grape Growers of Ontario every grape grower is a member practically, and they have a grape pricing schedule for those that don't know. And that sets the price for the harvest. And unfortunately, they consider PIWI grapes hybrids at the moment, and that reduces the price by about a third. So instead of getting $1,500 a ton, you get $530 a ton. That will definitely point grape growers in the direction of planting higher priced vines like pure vinifera, because they feel they can get a better yield, even though the cost savings of planting PIWI grapes is greater, because you're only spraying 0 to 2 times per year, and they just require less maintenance. So in Germany, PIWI vines, especially the modern ones, the ones that were developed after 2000, are considered vinifera. North American grapevines are a grapevine. They're probably 99% the same as Vitis vinifera. And the breeding really has, over the last 100 years, has really stripped it down to just a small selection of genes that are fungus resistant. And they're, for all practical purposes, vinifera. But that is something we have to decide and talk to grape growers of Canada about, or grape growers of Ontario about, and in BC as well, and see if we can figure out a way to get these grape prices up for these types of vines. And then finally, we have to deal with the VQA, and the VQA currently has a 0% Labrusca regulation in their rules that it cannot have any Labrusca in its parentage. Unfortunately, most PIWI vines do. The two right now that are available into Canada are Mascaris and Monarch. They don't. But the VQA has actually approved vines that have Labrusca in their heritage. So that would be Marquette, Ballard, Chancellor, and Chambruson. So all of those actually do have Labrusca in their past. So, and it's such a small percent, and really, I don't see it as much of a problem. I'm sure we could convince the VQA that it should be more about taste, not about genetic history from 8 generations ago. So that is something that, again, PIWI International and the Canadian section is going to be working on. Those are my 4 priorities. So we will be having a website up. I've just completed the incorporation and getting the bank accounts for membership. So I'll be rolling that out hopefully in the next month so that we can get more people discussing this. But if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. We'll share it at the end, but PIWI Canada or PIWIgrapes.ca will be the website address where you can find more information on the Canadian issues. So that's what I have for now.
Thank you so much, Darcy and Alexander, for your presentations on PIWI. Sounds like there's still lots of work to do in order to be able to bring these PIWI varieties to Canada. When you get that website up and running and any other resources, please send them to me and Ethan, and we'd be more than happy to also share that on CGCN's website. CGCN is a member of the PIWI International Organization as well. So now we're going to move into our next presentation from Andréanne. So she is a viticultural and enology researcher at the Centre de Recherche I'm going to butcher this name, Agroalimentaire de Mirabel, or CRAM is what we usually call it. She has finished her thesis. She's currently in the revision process from biological sciences at Brock University with a specialization in plant sciences, enology, and viticulture. She joined CRAM in October 2021 to oversee applied research projects that help the industry on topics such as the use of geotextile, pruning, physiology of Vitis vinifera, and to run the Quebec bud hardiness monitoring program. She also manages the CRAM experimental vineyard with more than 30 different cultivars. So now I open the floor to Andréanne. Just got to unmute yourself.
Okay. Wow. Like every time, it's like I never used Zoom before. Thank you for the introduction, Darian. You can hear me, right? I'm assuming. You'll tell me if you're not hearing me right now.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Thank you. Awesome. So thank you for the introduction. So the CAM, just for a little context for the new people here, it's a not-for-profit research center. We do a lot of research on the, greenhouse and pests, disease management in greenhouses, but we also have a big mandate on grape and wine research, viticulture and enology for the Quebec industry. And I just joined about 18 months ago. So today I was invited by CGCN to talk about our cultivar trial study. Many other research centers, we are kind of waiting for the cluster funding to see how much this will develop our cultivar trial capability in the next few years. But in Quebec, we were lucky that we have the government of Quebec that funded already a part of our cultivar trial study. So I'm here to show you what we've started on and how we went about it and kind of what our objectives are, but I don't have data yet, obviously. So, obviously my PowerPoint is not. Okay, so I just will touch on climate change in the Quebec vineyards just to give you kind of a context and also discuss really more in detail the context of the upcoming research project. I'll talk about our decision-making process and how we are going about choosing our cultivars. So there's a lot of opinions on what we should be trying, which we shouldn't be trying. In Quebec, we have much less regulations for our IGP, like our VQA type appellations. So we don't have regulation on the type of cultivars that's being used. So that's giving us a lot more freedom than Ontario, for example, like Darcy touched on. And then I'll talk to you about our cultivar selection criteria and what's our timeline and our expectation for our experimental design and our data collection. So just a reminder of like Quebec and where it is and what are the grape growing region. Obviously, I hope everybody here knows where Quebec is by now, but our grape growing region are really more located in the south here of Quebec, really close to the US border. Most of the vineyards are located there. And when we look at this map, this is a map of all kind of agricultural regions in Quebec. And there was a paper published in 2017 by Roy et al. And it did an evaluation of the impact of climate change for potential agricultural regions in Quebec. So where most of the vineyards are currently located in Montérégie, Estrie a little bit, really in this area. I hope you see my mouse. Our experimental vineyard, to give you context, is located right here, just north of Montreal. But there's a lot of vineyards that are currently located around Quebec City. There's an island here called l'Île d'Orléans, located around here, and some of them are starting to be located around Saguenay. So as you can see, and some even, I think there's a couple now in Gaspésie. So we're quite spread out in the region compared to, let's say, BC, which is a little more localized, your growing region, and same with Ontario, although it's spreading now, but in Quebec, we're really spread out a lot, and it's giving us a big variety of climate and a lot of difference in length of growing season and in growing degree days, for example. So in Montérégie, we can reach 1,500 growing degree days on some good years, but in Saguenay or around Quebec, we'll reach like 1,000 growing degree days or 1,100 growing degree days when it's going well, and Gaspésie will get to like 900 growing degree days. So it's really kind of impacting the type of cultivars we'll be selecting. So that's just to keep in mind for context of this project. So there was a research done to evaluate the impact of climate change in Quebec. And like everywhere, we've seen that we are going towards more extreme weather pattern. And also, as it was mentioned in the previous presentation, weather systems that are encouraging of disease development, which is really worrisome because we already, like Ontario, have a very humid climate that is prone to disease. We're going towards more growing degree days and more frost-free days, but it's limited. It's still going to be limited, even not as warm as other climate, for example. We're going towards higher minimum winter temperatures and fewer occurrences of extreme cold events, but they will still be present. And I just put this graph here to show you, and I'll walk you through it. This graph is showing you the chances of not having temperature below these 4 thresholds that are listed here. So obviously at -24, if we reach -24, we will struggle with growing Vitis vinifera, obviously without protection. -27 is more for the Vidal, that kind of grape. -30 maybe more Concord, and -34 being a threshold a bit for Frontenac, like in Marquette. These are the hardier ones. Like at -34, we can expect to see some damage. And these lines are showing us the odds based on either pessimistic for the dotted line or optimistic scenario to see to no longer see temperature below these temperatures. So what it's telling us is that by 2070, for example, we will no longer have winter with -34 or below, but we will still have 1 in 10 winter that might have a -30, or 1 in maybe 5 or 5 every other winter, or every 3 winter that will have temperature below -27. So in terms of climate adaptability for Quebec, like, yes, there's the whole disease resistant part, but there's also a part on tolerance to cold and how we're going to go about managing our cold sensitivity and the challenges associated to that. In terms of spring frost, it's really interesting to see that climate change prediction are not predicting more spring frost, but we already have a lot. So it's not like if we were starting from nothing and we will stay at nothing. We, for example, this year, some of our vineyard, like it was a particularly bad year, we saw up to 6 frost night on some sites, and it's not over. There might be one, I think, tonight. So that's really stressful. So in our climate, spring frost is an issue, cold is an issue, and diseases are an issue. So it's really easy to grow grape in Quebec. So for our cultivar trial study, we had to get it started like ASAP. We couldn't wait for the cluster because we got funding from the MAPAC. So that's the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food in Quebec. And this really forced us to start and to plant this year. So we had to select cultivar and we couldn't wait on the caps, on the cluster. We couldn't wait on that and on seeing what other research centers and on PIWI availability. We had to plant stuff this year, but it's really interesting for our cultivar selection. You'll see anyway. And how, what were the framework for our research project is really the MAPAC, the ministry's mandate for all cultivar trial studies within the horticultural sector. So the 5 kind of teams are identifying cultivars that are adapted to our climatic conditions, to improve climate change resiliency, to reduce pesticide usage, and to have control, to do this in controlled experiment with scientific supervision. So not just growers trying it in different sites, it's really to have a supervision of a research center, so us for the grape science, for the grape cultivar trial study, and to have also publicly available results. So results that will be shared in the industry and that will be available to any growers interested. And I think this is pertinent because although the cultivars we'll be trying are not necessarily all like, they're not necessarily PIWIs, or they're not necessarily cool upcoming cultivars, I do believe that many grape growers in other regions in Canada, in Nova Scotia, in other than Niagara Peninsula, in Ontario, and maybe in Vancouver Island, for example, could really benefit from the results we'll have from our cultivar trial study. So there's really specific objectives of the research are to characterize the growth of these cultivar in our terroir, in our specific Quebec terroir, to quantify and characterize particularly the sanitary interventions that are required to manage disease on these cultivars, to quantify their cold hardiness, to determine what kind of protection methods are required. Is it really extensive? Is just snow will be enough, that kind of thing, like how hardy can they get? And also do preliminary yield assessment, considering that our project is going to be just a few years long. We can't have full-blown yield evaluation, obviously, like on young vines, we know that it can be misleading. But anyway, to supply these information to growers, and then they can use them for decision making. And then we will also determine all the factors that are related to enological potential of these new cultivars, including sensory testing. And this is where particularly the CAPS program, like the cluster, will be especially helpful to fund really all the aspect about enology and sensory. So we really hope this works out. It will be a multi-step process. That's how the cultivar trial study with the Quebec government work. It's a multi-step process. There's a level 1, that's a planting at an experimental research station or vineyard like us, with data collection that's really supervised. And then we share the data and we invite growers to plant it. We set up experimental blocks at growers that we already work with. And this will occur from 2027 onward. So ideally, we'll have at least 5 different vineyards that will be planting some of these cultivars, and then we can see how they're performing on other sites. And then once we share the information, we can share what we've seen at our research station with all these cultivars side by side, but we can also share what growers have been observing. So in terms of decision-making process to decide which cultivars were going to be planted and any decisions that have to be made with this project, a lot of the decisions are run through a committee. That's like a decision committee that was assembled really to supervise the trials. And on this committee, we have representatives from the CRAM, obviously, but we also have several grape growers. We have members of the Conseil des Vins du Québec representatives. So, for example, the directeur général, la directrice générale, and we have a representative from the R&D committee of the CVQ. We also have agronomists and enology consultant, and we have representative of the MAPAC, the Ministry of Agriculture in Quebec. The meetings are held regularly at each key point of the process, like, for example, deciding which research we're going to do, which criteria is important, deciding which cultivars, and also planting decisions, like do we want to go with a commercial planting or hand planting, like all these things. I try to get the committee to approve all the major decisions so that we decide this as a group, and we make sure we make the most relevant decision for the industry. And decisions are made by majority vote, but we haven't had an issue yet. We'll see in the future. So how do we go about selecting new cultivars? So first of all, we had to establish some cultivar selection criteria. We had a list of about 200 cultivars that included all the PIWIs, many Italian, many Resdure from France, all the disease-resistant programs. And we have also included in our research all the cultivars from Cornell, from Minnesota, and other breeding programs, and just to get kind of a wide range of cultivars we could try, because we're so open with what we can try in Quebec in terms of regulations. And so we separated our selection criteria based on identification, viticultural, enological, and resistance criteria. And I'll develop on these now. And within each, we've identified parameters that are more used for research and for information gathering, and parameters that are more used for evaluation and if they're make or break deal. And you'll see what I mean by that. So in terms of identification criteria, the information we've been gathering for our research has been mostly on color of the grape, obviously, on genetic background and on geographic origins. Although our Quebec climate tend to be more suited for white varieties in general, like generally speaking, we didn't want color to be like limiting, so we just use it as like a information to know, and we just keep track of how much of each color we're trying. And then for the genetic background, I know Ontario, like we've have it in there because Ontario, you know, with the Labrusca limitation and everything, which we've been talking about, it's interesting also before the talk. In Quebec, it's not a limitation, but it's still interesting to know, and it helps you have an idea of what to expect, especially in terms of viticultural performance and enological potential. And then geographic origin was like really important for me to track down for all of these cultivars, because to make sure that whether or not they are hardy, it's a good indicator for hardiness. In terms of viticultural criteria, we had some make or break characteristic here. So the criteria we really researched were cold hardiness, timing of bud break and harvest, yield, vigor, and type of growth. And vigor and type of growth, obviously, Quebec is very vigorous. Like we have some very fertile soil, lots of water. It tends to give a lot of vigor. And because we have to protect our vines either with soil like hilling up or use geotextile, when we have highly vigorous vine that are growing in a very drooping way that would benefit from being on a higher cordon, for example, if they're not cold hardy, it's really not suited for our climate. So it was really important for us to characterize all these factors and to research them out. And the committee determined that they wanted to use cold hardiness, timing of harvest, and yield as really make or break parameters, or as at least classification parameters. And you'll see how we've used that to make our selection. In terms of phenological criteria, because we have a colder climate, we have a lot of acidity, very high on some wines. We tend to have a different kind of ratios and a lot of tartaric, a lot of malic, and not eat out a lot of malic during the ripening process. So the amount of acidity was an important factor. And then we try to find information on aroma and phenolic compound and organoleptic profile, but that was all very difficult to find. But it's just interesting information, and none of these were really make or break for the growers. We already deal with a lot of acidity, and it's kind of part of our terroir, part of our wines. So it wasn't really, it's not a scary thing for us, but it's interesting information to have. And then the last kind of family of criteria that was really important was the resistance criteria. We try to find all the peer-reviewed or like reliable information we could find on disease resistance and pest susceptibility in general. And we determined that the committee determined that downy, powdery mildew, and botrytis were really the most important disease that we were going to focus on. And you'll see how we integrated this in our selection process. So what we did is we built a giant list, as I said, with like about 150 to 200 cultivar, find all the information we could on these parameters with a specific attention given to these parameters that were made for evaluation. So how we selected them is that first of all, we classified everything, whether they were hardy or not hardy. So because growers are already used to growing not hardy cultivar and to protect them, they wanted to be given the chance to try not hardy cultivar that they would have to cover. Like they wanted to be given chance to struggle a little bit more if they could. It's funny to joke and not to see anybody's face, but anyway. So we separated all the cultivars in whether they are hardy or not hardy, and we don't have any reliable data for this. And hardy in Ontario doesn't mean hardy in Quebec, obviously, for example. So there's a lot of to be determined there, but we did our best. And then we separated them based on whether or not we were predicting that they would be early ripening, medium ripening, like mid-season ripening, or late ripening for Quebec. And anything that was predicted to ripen after mid-October was automatically eliminated from our selection. So for example, if we talk about cultivars, we would know something like Cabernet Sauvignon wouldn't have made the cut. Riesling barely makes the cut, not really, because we don't really have enough growing degrees on most regions to ripen it. So we eliminated a lot of cultivars from, for example, from some PIWI reports we saw that were saying they would be more later harvested. We just can't do it in Quebec. So then we put the cultivars that were remaining through our disease resistance trial. So anything that was, well, it's not trialed yet, but anything that we could find information telling us that it would be very susceptible to one of these 3 diseases was automatically eliminated. And then likewise, anything that was reported to have regular yields of 6 tons per hectare and less, below 6 tons per hectare, we were eliminating right away. In Quebec, we already struggle with getting yields that are within the national average for yields because we have a lot of cold damage and stuff like that. So we determined 6 tons as being an absolute minimum, and anything reported below that, we didn't want to even like try. So this gave us 6 kind of general categories, and we tried to select a few cultivar within all of these categories for our trials. So that gave us the chance to have cultivars that would be suited for different Quebec climate, Quebec terroir, like I was showing you on the map, and that would be resistant and also have relatively decent yield that would be adequate for the economic side of our industry. So what I'm going to show you now, so what we did is with that list, I sent it to the committee, and the committee filled out a survey expressing their choices, what cultivars they would like to see. And then I tried to source those cultivars, which, as we've been talking, the PIWIs are challenging to get a hand of, but I'm losing my English now that I've been in Quebec for 18 months. But what I'm going to be showing you is the results of our survey we sent to our committee, and then what we will be planting this summer. So first, for all the hardy cultivars, we didn't have enough in all of the ripening category, and generally these hardy cultivars tend to ripen in our climate anyway. So these are the cultivars, the group really wanted to try the cultivars that are listed here in order of preference, and these are the cultivars that I managed to source. The Mavo, you might have not heard of it. It's the Mark Hart is a breeder, I think, in Minnesota, and we had some of his selection at our experimental vineyard in Cam, one of our many cultivars we have. And these 2 cultivars particularly have been showing me really good winter survival, uncovered, super hardy, super disease resistant, not a speck of disease on them, even when we don't spray much. And very good yield and good winemaking profile, good organoleptic profile. So I'm really enthusiastic about them, and we're propagating them ourselves. Evangeline is from Nova Scotia, which is not officially named yet, but it's a Nova Scotia thing that they have sent us. We're trying Chenibec, which is a Quebec breeder that's developed it, and it's from a nursery that's doing micropropagation as well, like we were talking earlier. Then Itasca and Clarion, both from University of Minnesota, that will be trying them. Yeah, and Fleurté is more of a, oh my God, I have a blank on what it is, but we can talk about it another time. I can send you detail if you want them. Sorry, I'm blanking hardcore. And then Rondeau is more of a PIWI, but I couldn't get my hand on it, but I'm hoping for 2025. I think I had some secured for that. In terms of not hardy cultivar that are more early ripening, we have Solaris and Bacchus Blanc. They're not, Solaris is more of a disease resistant from Europe, but Bacchus is definitely not like a recent breeding, but we felt like there was some good potential to try based on parameters we could find our research on, and I could get my hand on some. So, and because it's not popular in the industry, we will try it out. In terms of not hardy and mid-season ripening, we're hoping for, we got some Ilios from that was talked about, I think, by Darcy earlier, from Eric Emberg in New York. So we are getting 50 vines from him. And we're hoping to plant Villaris and Pinotin in the future. And for not hardy late ripening, Noiret is an interesting one because it's a Cornell breed like grape, which I don't think will be hardy in our climate. That's why I put it there. I think it's going to be more similar to like a Concord or maybe Vidal. We'll see to be determined, honestly. And we're also going to be testing Johanniter that was mentioned also by Darcy, also from Eric Ember. So this is in summary what we'll be planting. I put it all there together, and the color matches their color, obviously. So green is the white cultivar and the red. So we don't have a lot of red cultivar. We're also going to be planting these additional cultivar that were kind of recommended by Alain Bro, which is a breeder in a nursery in our province. I know Regent was, I think Alexander was saying that you're moving away from Regent, but I think there's some good hardiness there. So we'll see in Quebec how it looks like and the type of wine we can make. And we have two reference cultivar. We'll be comparing these to Vidal and Marquette because they're well established in the industry. The growers know them, are very familiar with them. So by comparing these cultivar to something they know, I think it's going to help people to be able to decide to make decisions on them. In terms of experimental design, just classic experimental design for these kind of scientific monitoring study. It's going to be randomized complete block design where we're going to be interplanting these cultivar in blocks of 10. And 4 blocks, maybe 5 blocks, I'm getting 50 of each vine. So we'll see how much we end up being able to plant and how much survive. I want to test everything unprotected, even the stuff we don't think will be hardy, just for the sake of testing it and see what happens. Typical vine row spacing for the region, using geotextile for the not hardy stuff because it's standard practice now. I think it's safe to say that it's standard practice in Quebec. And we're going to be replicated small batch winemaking trials. Obviously, we're not able with 50 vines of each, we're not able to do big, large scale winemaking, but that's why we're going to growers afterward to get bigger trials. So we're hoping we're just going to do small batch winemaking trials that will allow us to do sensory evaluation. We will do, many of these vines are not officially, they come from certified nurseries maybe, but they don't necessarily come, they're not necessarily tested, those vines. So we will do preliminary virus testing on everything we're planting. And we're going to be scouting for the vectors and spraying, probably like being very diligent on that, but we will test everything either when we receive it, because we get a lot of cell, like things that are already like in pots and stuff like that. So with leaves, so we'll be able to test that, but and then test as soon as we can for the other cultivar that are bare root. The data to be collected, and this is all data that will be available. That's why I'm talking about it right now, because it's data that will make publicly available through these webinars or communications and everything. So mostly looking at phenological development and pest susceptibility big time, seeing how pests, what is the real resistance, particularly interested in, especially if in the future we plant more PIWIs. I'm interested to see our other European disease-resistant cultivar. We tried 2 already at our research vineyard. We tried Zivico and Zivona, and it turns out they're very sensitive because we don't have the same like strain of fungal diseases, the same type of fungal disease. So I think genetic of fungal diseases, I should say. So very interesting to keep track of susceptibility there. Just tracking typical other viticultural parameters, and vine balance and yields and stuff like that, as much as we can, considering how young the vines will be. Looking at enology, pre-harvest monitoring, big time, and berry chemistry, like acidity, obviously, and sugar profiles, but also YAN and phenolic compounds in the must and in the final wines, looking at how the wines are also aging for the time that we'll have them with us, which is just a few years. And then look at sensory evaluation. We're hoping to do descriptive analysis, maybe a rate all that apply for the sensory nerds out there, but this is not for many years. So, and this is really dependent on the CAPS funding. And we will also do some grape and wine community tasting for the growers for the producer to really see what these grapes turn out to be. So finally, timeline. I'm sorry, I'm going a bit over time, but timeline. We're planting this summer. All the grapes I've presented to you, they're all sourced and confirmed. We're going to be planting a few off cultivars in 2024 that we couldn't get until next year. 2025, we're hoping to start initial enology data collection, a little bit of information on how they're ripening, what we planted this year particularly. And then in 2026, we're really going to get into our real winemaking and our real initial sensory data collection. And 2027, then we're really hoping to have a full-scale sensory evaluation of all the cultivars and hope to distribute the data, start talking to the growers about putting these vines in their vineyards. So thank you. I just want to thank my committee. I think some of the members of the committee are here today. So thank you to the cultivar selection committee. I really appreciate the help and the input. And to Gatsby, who really helped me with the research for these cultivar. We did a ton of research. So yeah, it wouldn't have been done without her. And then the funding, like the MAPAC right now is funding this project extensively. So I've only mentioned that, but we're really hoping to work with CGCN if the cluster comes through. So I'm sorry to say this, but again, we'll need that. So thank you so much, and I'll answer any question you might have.
Thank you so much, Andréanne. We are all waiting on that cluster approval. Hopefully be able to hear about a funding announcement. Fingers are crossed for July, but safe bet is probably August, September. We know that kind of puts a dampen in those plans for harvest or the growing season for this year, but definitely full scale for next year.
No,
and I can assure you, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, well, I feel we're lucky in Quebec because we were really able to launch this year. Right. We had to move forward. So we're kind of like doing our thing there. And if we can have another round of planting, let's say 2025, something like depending on how things evolve, we will work with the other province too on how their cultivar trial study are going.
That's great. I know not all researchers were as lucky as you were to be able to get that access to other funding, but we will, as soon as we know, we're going to let everybody else know. And I can assure you that those little jokes within your presentation are well received. I know you can't see any faces or hear any voices, but I'm definitely laughing.
Good.
So we're going to move on. We have Helen Fisher, who has saved the day, stepped in last minute for us. So she's going to be presenting as well, a little bio on her. So she ran a significant viticultural research program at the former Horticultural Research Institute of Ontario and subsequently the Department of Plant Agriculture of Vineland. This included vine management research, so trellising, spacing, various crop modification techniques, soil management research, which is organic amendments and soil drainage, and she maintained a long-standing wine and table grape breeding program. So although retired from active research in 2011, she maintains industry contact through field testing of remaining breeding work and new rootstock selections, various technical review committees, including the OGWRI, active teaching roles with Niagara College, the winery and viticulture technician, University of Guelph online viticulture, and consults in viticulture management, specializing in challenging climatic zones. So thank you so much, Helen, for joining us today and saving the day. I will leave it to you.
I believe that's working, is it?
Yes, your mic is on, video is turned off, but it's your choice if you want to turn that on.
Oh, now how do I do that?
There should be a button at the bottom of your Zoom screen that says start video. But if you don't want to turn your video on, if you can't figure it out, there's no worries. We can hear you.
Here it is. I got it. There we are. You get to see the old broad. I thank you very much, Darren. Most of what has been said today is quite complete. I'd like to thank Alexander particularly for that outline on the PIWI varieties, and Andréanne for a very comprehensive discussion on the variety of trials that are happening in Quebec. One of the things that I wanted to talk about really was just a minute here. How do I go to? Was why we're pursuing a whole lot of these various pathways to new varieties. And I was just on a webinar yesterday with the University of California they have a brand new breeder there who's just started about a year into his new role. And there's a lot of things that people are asking questions about, and particularly what's wrong with the 20 cultivars that the wine business these days, and why should we be straying from them in the present situations. So are we having problems because the diseases are more common or more severe? Is climate change really making a problem with the diseases, or are we just to the point where, because of monoculture, in that we're growing very closely related varieties of clones all over the world under different climatic conditions, is that the issue? And should we be breeding new varieties to counter these problems? We are obviously too dependent on fungicides, as our first speaker talked about, and we would like to very much get away from all this, but how can we do that and still maintain wine quality that is basically couched in vinifera terms, because our culture has looked at European wine styles as being the benchmark for wine quality in general. So that determines that we're in the vinifera categories. So now, how do we actually work into the potential for heat and drought and flood tolerance, which is where these newer climatic variabilities are coming in? And how do we build in spring frost, which this past week, and as Andréanne inferred perhaps tonight in Quebec, is going to be more serious problems. Winter cold, as Andréanne also inferred, is perhaps going to be more variable, but it's not going away anytime soon. So we create these new varieties that are tolerant of these things by changing the variety, or do we change the rootstock, or do we change both? And what are our priorities in order to be able to manage this? So how do we actually develop these new materials? Well, traditional crossing, which is what I did, but I didn't have the capacity to with molecular screening, which is now what one might call the traditional way to screen for new varieties now. But the thing that was pointed out yesterday with Luis's seminar from California was that you need to know what you're looking for. We can do all this molecular aided screening relatively consistently as long as we know what we're looking for. But that means that we need to find out the genetic source of the resistance, and we have to find out the function of that particular portion of the gene in order to be able to screen for it. You can screen for lots of things, but it's very difficult to actually pinpoint the function of that part of the chromosome to a specific target that we might have. For instance, powdery mildew, we've had several sources of powdery mildew resistance, and these are what have been worked into the PIWI vine and into some of the other disease-resistant vines. Downy mildew is a little more complicated because it's got a two-part resistance thing. There are differences in cluster susceptibility versus leaf susceptibility, and so it's been a little more difficult to actually program in downy mildew resistance. But certainly with powdery mildew resistance, there's been a lot of success stories there. They're not perfect, but we're getting there. But the multiple gene resistances are far more difficult, and this is where the real challenge comes in with trying to do molecular screening of a traditional cross. And in this case, we've got to look at drought tolerance, cold tolerance, and what I call here abiotic tolerances in general. In other words, not a specific disease that's targeting the plant, but a general climatic issue that is affecting the vineyard in general. So, and these kind of things need lengthy field trials for really good proof. And it's a little more difficult to actually target these as specific components of a new breeding program. We've made a lot of progress in powdery mildew, and the new material coming out of California, most of it is varieties that Andy Walker just introduced are Pierce's disease tolerant, which is a very important subject in the southern parts of the growing regions. But high quality wine has been retained by using vinifera as the base for the primary screening, and then working out to the other species that bring in the PD resistance, and then working backwards against vinifera in order to maintain a high quality wine standards, right? So that again, it's not just putting A to B and finding out how many parts of that next generation are going to function. One of the slides that Alexander had was the genealogy of Brunner, and if you could read the small print, in fact, there was no Nebraska in that one. You could read all the species that were on the line, and there are multiple different species that were in those original French hybrids that Cybele and Vidal and many others, Johanna Save and that whole group, all of those people looked at multiple species to bring into the French hybrid group the important parts of disease resistance, and in their case, they were looking for phylloxera resistance. All of these things have to be incorporated, and do you incorporate them in the rootstock or in the variety? So that's your other decision making that has to happen. But as implied by Luis yesterday, we need much more work to define these multiple gene parameters so that we can actually do some of the screening, such as with the powdery mildew group, for more general parameters such as drought and salt tolerance. So these are required now for particularly in rootstocks, but also potentially in varieties. But in the rootstocks that we need to use to buffer the southern communities that are going to be suffering more for drought conditions and potentially contaminated soils with salt rising to the surface because of the drought. So we've got other issues that need to be looked at. And again, we're going back to this 95 to 98% vinifera in the fruit quality, and consumer acceptance. Consumer acceptance is extremely important. The PIWI speakers mentioned that to the point where we need to be able to sell the grapes. So if the people don't understand what the varieties are, they may shy from those grapes. So we need to be able to do that as well in order to be able to make a strong impact in the vineyard community so that we can actually get back to this whole point of reducing the fungicides in order to be able to clarify the importance of these varieties. I had one more little slide here. The background here is actually some of my old breeding work that's long since disappeared, but some of the varieties that we're looking at right now are coming out of the PIWI group, or coming out of as Alexander and I'm having a brain fart. I've forgotten the first gentleman's name. But these are some of the European materials. Down here in Switzerland, Valentin Blattner is one of the private breeders out of Switzerland and has been developing a lot of new varieties, some more disease tolerant than others. At Rochedo, the nursery in Italy is with various important capacities. There's lots of breeding that has been going on in the United States. Cornell was mentioned already. The University of Minnesota, very important group that have been putting out very winter hardy material. Davis has had a long history with variety introduction, as well as working on rootstocks now. The University of Georgia has been working on vines for many years. The University of Arkansas has been working on table grapes for many years. And the USDA, both raisin grapes and rootstock work that's been going on for a long time. And as someone mentioned earlier, Czechia has some new varieties coming out. Hungary has traditionally had a breeding program as well. There was a traditional table grape breeding program in Chile. I'm not sure if it's still in existence. I'm sure I've left a few out here. Even though there hasn't been a whole lot of change up to this last few years in the variety spectrum of the wine industry, there really are lots of breeding programs that have been on the go for many, many years. But with the wine industry being so terribly conservative, it's hard to introduce new material outside local important communities where the industry is an integral part of the agriculture. So my comments really are just that there's lots of work going on. There's lots that can be done. There's certain things that climate resilience is going to make difficult to change. In other words, these abiotic stresses, winter injury for one thing, in terms of absolute hardness, can be mitigated, but can we mitigate acclimation and deacclimation rates, which is what's happened this past year, this past spring, when we had extraordinarily warm weather that pushed the growth, and then frost. And so how do we mitigate against that? That becomes a very difficult breeding question. So maybe it's up to other parts of the production system rather than the breeding itself. Anyway, those are my comments, and I leave it up to you to ask questions if you wish.
Thank you so much, Helen. Yeah, as Helen mentioned, this is the opportunity to ask any questions you may have. So there is a button at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. You're more than welcome to type your questions in there. We will present them, and then whoever is best suited to address it will address it. Ross, if you are available, I invite you to moderate today's Q&A session. I know that we do have some pre-selected questions available if there isn't any yet from the crowd.
Okay, thank you, Darian. Yeah, maybe I'll kick it off with a question. Maybe one for the PIWI team, if they're still with us. Is there any published information on sort of phenology timing, ripening timing for each of the varieties that potential growers can look through, and maybe any established suitability of different varieties to different climatic zones?
There's some research out of Poland. I don't have the paper. I can get it, send it to Darian when I have it. But Poland's starting to become a grape growing region. They have access to all the PIWI grapes, obviously being in the EU. So they've looked at basically temperature profiles. They've looked at a fair number of details, but not some of the phenology stuff for disease resistance, I assume. Or is that what they're kind of that area? Yeah. So Dr. Topher at JKI has a good paper on that. He lists probably about 30 different grape or PIWI grape varieties and their specific genes or genetic markers for like run1, RPV 3.3, yada, 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 on all the specific grape varieties. So that's available. I have those somewhere. I'll send them to Darian and then we can share them out. But there is a lot of good research. Luckily, my wife is a doctor, so I have access to all the research papers through the university. So I spend lots of time reading them.
Helpful.
Total hobby, but it's a lot of that information is available, but not publicly. It's all through the research journals.
Okay, maybe one more question, Darcy, while we've got you there. Obviously, PIWI's sort of trying to establish itself in the old world here, which is a fairly traditional wine consumer region. How are these new varieties being perceived by customers over there, and how are they being marketed perhaps by the producers that have adopted them?
So they have the PIWI Wine Awards. So that's kind of the big judgment on the grape varieties. A lot of this is being driven by environmentalism. So as I mentioned when I first spoke, France has only 3.7% of their cropland is vines, but they use 20% of the pesticides, and that's becoming a well-known thing. So it's mostly being driven by environmental and ethical factors. But what's happening is that, especially in the white wine category, they're almost indistinguishable from vinifera. The reds still have a little bit to go. And so they mentioned Regent, or Regent as they say in Europe, and that one is on its way out, but it was a big change from the original French crossings like say Val Blanc or Villard or any of those early hybrids. It was a step change. France is actually working on 4 PIWI varieties: Vidocq, Voltis, Floreal, and Artaban. We almost had them in Ontario through VineTech, but I ordered a bunch of them, but it got cut off. But if France is getting involved in this, and France is obviously the standard for vinifera, they really stick to their what they believe. If France is considering it and bringing it into the fold, then the rest of us have to follow along. But typically, the whites are indistinguishable. The reds are getting very close. And I think within the next round of breeding, so in the next 10 years within Germany and all the other breeding institutes, I think we'll be there. And I don't think consumers will be able to tell much of a difference.
Okay, yeah, that was going to be one of my questions for Helen or Don, if he was able to join us, was do you think there's a sort of a quality ceiling on these new varieties, and in terms of where they can get to? Obviously reds, there might be a bit of work to go, but you're saying that whites are pretty close, which is exciting. Maybe a question, I don't know whether this is for...
I might add to that, Ross, that I wouldn't say there's a ceiling. I just don't think we've got far from the floor at certain points, right? So I think we can always keep on improving that part of it, as long as you constantly have in your background that you're not compromising on the whole disease resistant portion of what you're looking at. And I think as Darcy, I apologize for forgetting her name, but as Darcy's inferred, the acceptance of this, I think, is becoming more and more general when people are driven by the whole environmentalist portion of the exercise.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to add one thing, because in Montreal, there's just an acceptance of the grapes they can grow, and they just drink what they can grow. It's not a matter of whether it's pure vinifera or not. And Andréanne, do you agree that that's kind of that wine culture of local is becoming just what they can grow, and they're accepting?
I think on the trendsetters, yes, they're more accepting of what's available and what's like adapted to a climate, but I don't think that the general population is accepting of that. And I think when you look at the sales at the SAQ, for example, the percentage of Quebec wine that's being sold there is like very limited. There's also availability issues, obviously, but in terms of what the typical consumer prefers, and I think we are lacking, for example, in Quebec, we are lacking on research on exactly what is the driver for Quebec consumer? What do they pick and why do they pick these wines? So I think it's early to say, although we do look, I think there's like a social media and like a commercial, like something that looks like we are more accepting of other cultivar maybe, but what I see on a day-to-day is that growers still want to plant vinifera and still want to plant like these. So I think we need, and I think if I can touch on wine quality, I do think that we need to, and this is inspired by the Quebec industry and seeing what growers are doing. I think a lot of these cultivars, sometimes we've dismissed thinking that they don't make necessarily high quality wines, but I think we just need to maybe think outside the box in terms of our winemaking methods. And I think I've talked to, let's say, new enologists, for example, Dr. Jennifer Kelly at Burke University, like we are like, we want to try a new way of making wines. We need to start thinking of, I'm sorry to throw Jennifer under the bus right there, but we need to like think of new ways of making wine maybe and adapt to these new cultivars. And I think that's especially true of cultivars with strong parentage, like genetics that might be less thought to be less favorable. So let's say in Ontario, like Lambrusco, for example. So I think there's a lot of research to be done on these cultivars, and they're different in here, like how they grow in Quebec, how they grow in Ontario. We all have to work on our own like recipes, and it doesn't have to be chemical. It just needs like adapting, like temperature control, and or maybe viticultural practices and things like that. So sorry, I have a lot to say about this. I think about it a lot.
I figured as much.
I have one more question that was submitted by another board member of ours that maybe, Helen, I know you do some work on rootstocks that maybe you might be able to answer. He was asking, with climate change causing both abnormally wet and dry conditions, should growers be considering using less common rootstocks?
Well, that's a possibility, except that even in the small trials I've got in the Simcoe Turkey Point area, the old standards are coming out just fine. Thank you very much. So 3309 and Riparia are looking just fine. Some of the other Riparia derivatives are not doing that well, like 101.14 and 169.49, 161.49. But in general, I think the standard rootstocks that are available here are doing well in the north being Southern Ontario and probably Quebec. But I think where rootstocks are going to become more critical for balancing vines due to potential climate changes, due to drought stress and potentially flood stress in like we've seen in New Zealand and Australia lately. That's where I think the rootstock changes are going to happen. Here, our potential for drought stress is there, but is not a critical issue as it is further south.
Hans, did you have a question as well? You just got to unmute yourself.
Yeah, it happens every time.
It's because we're old, Hans.
Yeah, I definitely belong in that club for sure. Yeah, first, thank you all for doing this. Very interesting and kind of fascinating to see how the future will develop in this. But first, to start, just a brief comment to Andréanne. The Flortaille that you are struggling with, this is actually an Italian variety from Udine, but I'm kind of questioning while it is in the cold hardy section, because I think according to VCR they're hardy to -23.
Yeah, we'll see. I don't remember where we got this information. There must have been some source somewhere that said cold tolerance, and then we might have misinterpreted sometimes cold tolerant in Europe versus cold tolerant here, not the same. But we'll see anyway what happens with it. So yeah. But making notes of that.
One thing that I'm kind of curious about is just very recently the government of Canada has announced that gene editing tools such as CRISPR are going to be considered equivalent to conventional breeding tools, yeah. Basically. And I'm kind of curious to know from all of you what you think that the opportunities are in this, but also possibly what the limitations are in terms of how far you can actually go with this. And also, I'm not sure what PIWI International is actually thinking about this, because there is in Europe, there's a little bit of a different attitude in terms of approach to genomic manipulation. I'm not sure exactly how I would describe this. No, personally, I find that quite fascinating, actually. I'm kind of curious what opportunities are in this.
Yeah, well, from PIWI International's point, I'm not sure what their exact stance on it is. We haven't really talked about that, but I can see that being an environmental organization is basically the goal. Where, we want to spray less and have a healthier vineyard. But there is a lot of. I worked in a genetics lab, so I'm perfectly fine with CRISPR and doing that type of stuff. But that's because I worked like 6 years in it, and so we didn't do plants, we did mice, but that was just the way we did work, and we did all the testing. It was, once you see the levels of precautions, you understand that it's not going to be dangerous, but a lot of people just don't understand stuff, so it becomes dangerous in their mind. So that's going to be a big PR thing, like talking about what it is. But I can see just getting the Run 1 genetics from the new French varieties, RPV 3, 3.1, 3.3, and then the Ren 3 and Ren 9 genetics, just inserting them straight into Merlot. That may be something that makes disease resistant and gets the quality people are looking for. But again, I'm a scientist, so that's what I see the perfect world, but I don't know if that's the case.
That question came up yesterday when we were talking to Luis in UC Davis, and one of the nurserymen had sent in a question saying, well, why can't we do that? Why can't we just take Cabernet and insert, gene XYZ that are all grapevine genes? It's not like you're doing Frankenfood stuff, right? So why can't we just do that and still call it Cabernet? But then you get into the whole issue, the naming issue, and when is a variety a new variety and when is it a clone, right? And a clone is technically genetically different from its mother vine, because otherwise it wouldn't be a separate clone. So, where do all the legalities come in when you try and do something like that? And CRISPR is a perfect vehicle for doing that sort of thing.
So we have gone a little bit over our webinar time, but I think that we had a great, no, don't apologize. It's a great Q&A session. This is definitely the area of the webinar that we needed to improve on. So through our future sessions, that's what we're going to be trying to do. But I'm just going to wrap everything up here so everyone can get to, I guess it's lunch here at least. So we're done with the Q&A session. So let's skip that part. I just want to thank all of our guest speakers today. So thank you to Alexander. I think he had to hop off. Thank you to Darcy, Andréanne, and Helen for saving the day. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us and share your work with the Canadian grape and wine industry. So we don't have any other webinars scheduled for 2023, but as the growing season is now in full swing, we understand everyone's busy. So that's why we made this decision. Please be sure to follow our social medias on Facebook and Twitter, subscribe to our email newsletter, check for updates on our website if you wish to be informed of future webinars and other resources for certification programming and for research. We will be posting our cluster year 5 research summaries and final research summaries on our website, hopefully sometime this summer after they've gone through the approval process. This webinar has been recorded. This will be posted to our website if you want to revisit or send it to someone who wasn't able to attend. I'll also be getting the PIWI presentation. I have Andréanne's and maybe I can grab Helen's from her as well. And lastly, when you exit this webinar, you'll be asked to complete a brief survey where you can share your thoughts on today's session. We'd really appreciate it if you took a couple minutes. Helps us to improve for future sessions. And thank you again to all of our speakers and for everyone that was able to attend. I hope you enjoy the rest of your days.